Okay, good morning. And glad to see everyone, like I said, on this nice brisk morning. Not be an understatement to call it brisk, but that's all right. One of these chances we're all northerners get a chance to make fun of us. It's just 23. Again, good to see everybody. Hope the week was all right. So, kind of as I got to think, today's February 1st.
Yep.
That was a fast month, wasn't it? It always goes this fast. It seemed like yesterday it was turning the page for the new year, and here it is we're already a month into 2026. So that's keep going this fast. It's gonna be next year before we know it. But anyway, as we're getting into here, as we get into chapter 5 of James, as we kind of continue with this study right here. Again, James is kind of giving us good advice on, of course, last week we were talking about planning using and making plans with God's guidance. And today we're going to get into one of them topics that like I said, I'm not a preacher, but just studying this, I can understand. But talking about money. So anytime you start bringing that term into the equation, it can cause you a little bit unsettled, and but James is going to give us some good advice here on how to do that. So we'll start off. When we were kids, think about, you're 8, 10 years old. What was a large sum of money for you?
$1.
$1? Yeah. I got $2 a week allowance.
Yeah.
So I went to the Gold Mine Arcade in Jasper Home, but I can remember, like I said, especially birthday time, I'd get a card, usually I'd have $2, $3 in it. I thought I was doing good. Grandmother would give me 5. I was always the big donor. And then, of course, mom and dad, once they got to the point of the money, it might be 20. I remember as a kid in the 80s, if I had a $20 bill, I was walking around some money.
Yeah.
And same thing at Christmas one time. I had shared this story one time. I remember I had $30 of Christmas money, and we played a road basketball game up at Hazelville, and I left my wallet or left my jacket or left something with that in there. Man, it was just, I was devastated, And Coach Hannon, they called up to Hazelville. Somebody turned it in, and money was still in there, so I was still surprised. But yeah, so I like all the stories, as I can, we can tell all these, that walk uphill both ways story. Remember going to Paul Till's service station, if you had 50 cents, he's going to get you a drink of candy bar. Maybe have a little bit of change left over if you're lucky. Tell kids that today, they're just amazed. So, and then finally, like I said, as we get into it right here, I want you to think now about the first job outside your home that you got paid to do, your first real job. You got a paycheck, you got cut taxes, a real job. And how much did you get paid? And how did you feel about the wages? I can still remember mine. Mine was at Carbon Hill Manufacturing right there. It was a defense. We made the cargo, the fatigues for the Army. Camouflage, with the cargo, back pockets and all that. I made $3.35, make a minimum wage, $3.35 an hour. I think the average paycheck I take home about $110 each week. And some, which, for a kid, I thought it was a lot of money. So, anybody else remember the days of the $3.35 minimum wage or less?
That was my first job too. $3.35.
$3.35.
And I thought I was doing good.
Mine was less than $3.
Yeah. What was yours?
I think it's $2.85.
$2.85, yeah. Okay, I think I can sort of talk about that. And one time, like I said, I remember during that summer. I say, I post, I'm surprised I can't do that now. I wish I had this one. I'm gonna have this one then, but I'd save some money. I'd always put some money back, and I had a little formula I did. It's like I had, like I said, summertime, you spend, I'd get up and work all day, and you have time to spend it anyway. Whatever I didn't spend, I just saved it. And I can remember at the end of the summer, I bought our first VCR in our house. Remember buying it? It was like $400 at a place out in Tuscaloosa that had a little digital clock on it. I never could figure out how to program it, but right when video stores came in, so it's, get them to watch movies. But anyway, so yes, a lot of good memories there and stuff. And I joke around, that what today's stuff. I think I've said this before. I've reached when I first started teaching, kids would just leave pennies on the ground. By the time I retired, they got to where dimes and nickels and even quarter. They just don't. Whatever kids don't want change. I'm just like, if you don't want it, put it right there, and just put it in. And I tell a story like I think the first month me and Freddie was married, we had to go change to get through the end of that first month. Always waiting on that first paycheck and teaching. So. And the next question I have there, what is your definition of wealth?
Mine's just having things that you need.
Yep, having things that you need. Having enough. That's mine. I told the kids that day. I said, I got enough.
Yeah.
And so I feel blessed with that. I bring it back for me snacks. It's just there, but they're like granola. One in Nature Valley granola bars, and this one kid, and he goes, "Coach, can I have one of them granola bars? I'll give you $1 for it." I mean, just get it. He just could not believe that I was not going to take money for that. But anyway, but yeah, so and we get into this, and and the Bible itself, as it gets into, we see where it talks about money, and some of the warnings we need to have about it. So, as we read through these 6 verses right here, is wealth a sin? Of course not. Right? You think about you think about it. Let's think about some people here in the Bible. For example, Abraham. Was Abraham considered a wealthy person of his time? He was. What about Job? King David? You got Solomon, and the list goes on right there. But the big thing was, even though they were rich people, but they were men of faith and character. And like I said, as I was researching this, think about Abraham's nephew Lot. Now, what about him? Well, when he became rich, it changed him, didn't it? Kind of ruined his character. So it's not that money is bad, and I think James, what he says right here, it's as we kind of get going right here, that the big factor I think is it's not the money itself, but it's our attitude towards the money. If that makes sense. So I think that's what James is going to teach us right here. So, can material things affect our relationship with God? How does a person's use of money reflect what is important to you? So we just some questions to ponder there. And I think it's those answers to those questions kind of gets into what I think James is telling right here. So, but as we get into it, the book, like I said, it has a title for the lesson. This week's Money Talks. I put "Put your money where your face should be" is one of those. So we're going to kind of look at it from this point. Again, some of my OCD with this, the book gets into because it jumps around to the verses right here. But let's look at the verse part of James 5, the first 6 verses right here. Let's just we'll read those, kind of get those out there, and that way we'll just kind of refer back to them. So, someone might maybe read the first 3 verses right there. James chapter 5.
Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped treasure together for the last days.
All right, and then the last 3, 4, 5, and 6 right there.
Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your labor, which is of you kept back by fraud, cry. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord Sabaoth. You have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you.
All right, so a lot, just 6 little verses right there, but a lot to look at. So starting off right here, as we get, kind of going along with the book right here on page 151 right there, in the basically it's the 3rd paragraph. It's it kind of author right here explains this. These rich men had hired laborers, and kind of referencing to verse 4. They had hired laborers and promised to pay them a specific amount. When the men had completed their work but had not been paid, the tense of the verb kept back in the original Greek indicated that they were never going to get their salaries. And we kind of, I've done some, I guess, put a little Latin term in here for any lawyer in the, is there any lawyers in that? I'm going to test him right here, see how well he did on that one. Quantum merit. No, I didn't either. I'm sorry, man. Don't be mad at me. Like I said, most of my things are teachers, so if I can bring other professions in, I'm good. Basically, as it's a Latin term, quantum, of course you can see quantity in there, and meruit, whatever, I think you see merit. Basically, it's a term that means as much as one deserves. It's a legal term, like that is used when someone's like taking someone to court because maybe they've done a job and someone hadn't paid them, or they've agreed to it, or something like that. So anyways, I put that in there. It's funny. I just came across that term earlier this week because I was doing some research on something else. Just one of those things where I was a wannabe. I guess I was a wannabe lawyer, so I was smart. I wasn't smart enough to do it. So, but anyway, so what James is speaking of right here is, we're looking at complete dishonesty right here. Wages that will never be paid. So in this case, if you agree to do something, to pay someone for work done, and they do the work and you don't pay them, that's basically what? What's that the equivalent of? That's theft. That's stealing, basically. And here in the next thing also, this is something that we have to be careful of. Well, I won't say we, but I think it's the same way as believers. We have an obligation also to pay our bills. Be faithful to our commitments, because if we're, if you have a bill and you're not paying it, like I said, probably someone's done work for you or done something for you. You get charged. That's we're obligated to do that. And I think in the book he kind of references that right there. And let's see, let me find it right here. Yeah, like right here again on page 151, the next paragraph I just read, it says, "Thou shalt not steal the law of God, and it is a law, and He will enforce it." As Christians, it behooves us to be faithful to pay our bills. As a pastor, I find myself embarrassed when unsaved men tell me about Christians who owe them money and apparently have no intention to pay it. So that's pretty easy for the citizen. Those bad guys hired those guys, but when we don't pay we're not paying our bills, then it's the same way. So James warned that. So let's go to now Deuteronomy 24, 14, and 15. Go over to Deuteronomy, and if someone gets that, let me know, and then we will.
I got it.
Go ahead.
You shall not oppress a hard servant who is poor and needy, whether one of your brethren or
so we see there, where it really talks about not oppressing a hired servant that is poor and needy. So, you know, so again, we have an obligation here, you know, to our commitments, and especially not taking advantage of those who have needs. And, you know, and as we kind of continue on right there, into page 151 right there on the, you know, as we continue to read it right there on that fourth paragraph, that's kind of what I did right there about talking about the pastor being embarrassed. Basically, you know, I think the important thing is just be honest with your money. Just be honest. And if you're that, you know, you're going to be in good shape. So that's kind of the first thing right there. So the first concern that James had that obviously was going on with the people he was writing to right here was, you know, first of all, as I said, kind of got it going right there, but the method of attaining wealth. So perhaps some people were getting work done and they were holding back wages. And so James was kind of addressing that and, you know, the issues there. And we're going to see, like I said, as we continue on, you know, with that verse 4, the last part of that verse 4, you know, we're going to see that, you know, the dangers in that. So from there, let's go to we'll go back to verse 6a right here. Again, I moved around, I lost my place right there. But in this one, James has it right there. It is right there, found it. So it says he condemned and killed the just, and he, you know, so really, you know, we're not referring to. I think our book talks about saying not necessarily killed should be taken in a figurative way, as in James 4:2. Though it's possible the rich man could so oppress the poor he would die. But if you look on page 152 in that second paragraph, controlling the courts was also an issue. If you remember back in the second chapter of James, in verse 6, where he's talking about, you know, if a rich man and a poor man come into the church, that shouldn't have any bearing on how you should treat someone. It talks about how he mentioned, why would you treat the rich man any better? He's the one that kind of oppresses you in court anyway. That's paraphrasing, but if we look right here, page 152 in the second paragraph, it says the courts in James' day were apparently easy to control if you had enough money. Poor workers could not afford expensive lawsuits, so they were beaten down every time. And, you know, continuing on, it says the workers had the just cause, but they were not given justice. They were abused and ruined. And like I said, killed should be taken in a figurative way. The poor man did not resist the rich man because he had no weapons in which to fight. All he could do was call on the Lord for justice. And the Bible warns us against the securing of wealth by legal means, because God owns all the wealth. So right there, you know, we see how James 2:6 fits in right there. We kind of get that. And, you know, that's the question right there. Really, has that changed much today? Do we see perhaps that there are two different justice systems for those that might be wealthy and for the regular folk? You know, I think you could argue right there, James's words are just as applicable today, you know, as they were then. So, but anyway, so now, as I said, you know, God owns all the wealth anyway. So let's go now to going over right here, as we continue on right here. Now we kind of get into. Right here before I got this note right here. Last sentence. There. Oh, there we go. So that's kind of where getting into the next thing right here. So it says, you and I may possess many things, but we do not own them. God is the owner of everything, and we are His steward. So I got right there, steward versus owner. What's the difference between? I mean, I think we know the difference, but it'd be kind of like this. When I was the head football coach, and I did fundraisers, I was the steward of the money for that fundraiser. I didn't own it, did I? I got it, but I didn't own it. Same way with the money that was in my, that I had to budget for the account. I had to be a good steward for it. And, you know, I think that's what James is, you know, what James is telling us right there is, you know, as looking at, you know, money more as being a steward of it than owning it. Does that make sense what we're saying right there? So how does that change steward versus owner? I mean, does that make a difference?
I mean, like, we're supposed to be, like, this church, the money that we take in, we're
Mhm.
supposed to be good stewards and make good decisions about what we do with the money for God's house.
Sure.
But we don't own it.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we don't. And I think that's, you know, it kind of got me thinking, when you think of it, you know, more that way, it's going to get you as a steward, because again, who owns all the wealth? God does. Maybe it gets you more in the right frame of mind on how to, you know, how to have a correct attitude toward it. Because again, this is I'll be honest with you, I don't like all money. I don't talk about God's love, but money, you know, it's one of those things. And we'll see right here, you know, probably a lot of the issues in the world, you know, they revolve around money. All right, so the method of attaining the wealth, you know, the held back wages, controlling the courts, you know, and then now the second concern that James had right here, and again, it's kind of following along, is the way the rich use their wealth. And that's verses 3 through 5. So if we look, you know, here, I'm just going to read this last paragraph to the first full paragraph on page 153. It says, it's bad enough gaining wealth in a sinful way, but to use that wealth in sinful ways just makes the sin greater. One way we look at right here is storing it up, verse 3. Now again, is there anything, the book says here, there's nothing sinful about saving. So, you know, we see right there some verses talk about that in 2 Corinthians. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children, etc., etc. So we go down to the next full paragraph there on page 153. But it is wrong to store up wealth when you owe money to your employees. These rich men were hoarding grain, gold, and garments. They thought they were rich because they had these possessions. So instead of laying up treasures in heaven by using their wealth for God's glory, they were selfishly guarding it for their own security and pleasure. So as we looked at, what's the line between saving and hoarding? Is it, you gotta say there's a line there, isn't it? Here's Lewis Turner. What's the line? Is there a line between saving and hoarding? Of course there is. What is that line? Can it really be defined, or is it, you think that's on an individual basis?
It has to be an individual.
Yeah, I think no doubt, because you know, for some, and again, I joke and stuff, and I'm the same way. I can remember first time when I retired teaching, I started looking at all the stuff I'd kept throughout the years. I could possibly need that. I need that. You know, I had these files upon files upon files. These worksheets, that worksheets, this old workbook, that old workbook, stuff like that. But saving and hoarding, something to think about right there. So, and again, but I think we all know. And again, there's nothing wrong with saving. You know, what about hoarding? That's one of those things there. You know, and he talks about it. If we go back and we're in verse 3, he talks about your gold and silver is cankered, basically rusted, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped treasure together for the last days. Even before that, your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten. So, you know, why that you save up, but you get, and we gotta realize this, is God gives us what we might have so we can have the joy of giving. And that's something there, I think, you know, that's what we see is lost in there. The joy of giving. And so the accumulation of money and wealth, you know, it's not the goal itself, but to use it wisely, as it's talking about right here. So let me look at something right here. So, you know, James 5, here's a commentary. James 5, 1-3 paints a picture of a person who hoards money and does nothing noble with it. It is right. You know, God gives to us that we might have the joy of giving. The person in James accumulates for his own gain. You know, when someone is someone that holds tightly on to money, and it changes you. You know, it talks about the moth eating away at clothes, the corrosion, like a battery that is not used. Money becomes toxic when it's hoarded. You know, and we think about it, you know, in, I think it's in, where is it right here? Getting me ahead right here myself. But we see, I think that kind of gives us, the idea is, what was it said? Basically, the person who hoards money but does nothing noble with it. You're just keeping it for the sake of keeping it. It could be, you know, you could be using it for a good cause. You know, that might be start getting into those, crossing those lines. But I think it's an individual, it's definitely a case by case basis right there on it. And it's just, I think it's one of those things, you know, we know we want to see it. I might be able to get it, but I don't know, I have a hard time. Because again, I think, you know, you see now, and I understand people who were alive during, you know, if they were alive during the Great Depression, I understand why people have, I guess, you know, you just hang on for a rainy day. You know, I get that. So, but anyway, I think, like I said, it's just one of those where, let's kind of get back into it right here. But so another, you know, so stored it up. The next one's keeping others from benefiting from it. So let's go to go to verse 4. And keeping others from benefit of it. Here's the danger, you know. So it's talking about laborers who have had their wages held back, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. So, what is that part of the verse a warning about deceiving people in regards to money?
God hears your cry.
God's going to hear their cry, and that's quite an indictment. So, you know, we should fulfill our commitments, and again, it goes back to, I said it earlier, don't withhold deceitfully, just be honest. Be honest with the money right there. So basically, storing it up, keeping others from benefiting, because again, the Lord's going to know. And then, you know, now, because it's just like, this is a very simple. If a cashier gives you back too much change, you call your attention to it. Or, hey, that's just my benefit right there.
I'll call attention to it.
Yeah, yeah, they can get docked about it. I'm one of those, you know, hey, you know, here's, hey, I only gave you 10, you gave me back change for 20 and stuff. Yeah, I think that's a simple way to kind of, you know, again, just being honest right there. You know, it happens sometimes. That's not what I'm saying, but I think that's a good antidote that can be shared right here. So, and finally, and it kind of goes back to the person who ever found my $30 that they had. I don't know who it was, I think, but you know, they were honest. You know, they didn't withhold deceit. So so now the other thing is living in luxury. And that's verse 5. And again, he gives us some things here where it's one of those where this is an individual thing. So last paragraph down there on page 154, going into 155, it says there's a great difference between enjoying what God has given us and and living extravagantly on what we have withheld from others. Even if what has been earned lawfully and in the will of God, we must not waste it on selfish living. There are too many needs to be met. Luxury has a way of ruining character. It is a form of self-indulgence. If you match character with wealth, you can produce much good. But if you match self-indulgence with wealth, the result is sin. And again, that's one of those things where it's kind of, is it bad to have nice things? And where's the line drawn for that? Again, we're not being told not to have nice things. But, but for example, if I go out and, I like extreme examples just because of this point. I go out and buy 3 brand new pickup trucks, and I'm having to use what I would use for my tithe to make the payment for it. I'm living extravagantly then. I got the money and I can afford it, but maybe that's kind of the idea. Does that kind of make sense right there? I guess. So it's not, is it bad to have nice things? What are the marks of a self-indulgent life? I think, those are some questions to think about right there. No one really need those answers, but, the extravagance. See funny examples, of that being made fun of, movies and stuff like that, but anyway, like one movie guy bought like a $2 million stamp and he used it to mail the letter with, So those are the way the rich use their wealth, storing it up, keeping others from benefiting from it, or living in luxury. So finally, the third concern right here is what their riches will do. And so we kind of jump back here to verses 1 through 4. And we see here in Matthew now, Matthew 6, 19 through 21. Is there anybody there that can read that? Matthew, go ahead.
Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
All right, so we see right there, definitely, with the words of Jesus right there, we can see that James he's probably recalling that moment right there when he's writing this letter, because that's basically, he refers to the rust and the moth eating. So he's kind of referencing that. So as we said, who owns all the wealth in reality? God. And at the end of the day, there's jokes about it all the time, but what's the destiny for all wealth here on earth? At the end of the day, what's the destiny for it? What's that? Consume, destruction. So, what was the old joke? Like, somebody, it was one of those things, one of those funeral jokes where the guy was laying there and was like, something, I can't take it with you, somebody threw a check in there or something, I can't remember what it was. But yeah, we hear that, you can't take it with you, But the destiny at the end of the day is it's going to be consumed. And that's, we see Jesus refer to that, let us seek the treasures, the treasures of, what was it said right there, 6:21? Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, because those are eternal. They don't rust or get eaten by moths or anything like that. So as we continue up, so riches have vanished. The next thing we have right here is misused riches erodes character. As we said, holding on tightly to money changes people. 1 Timothy 6 and 10, very famous. What's 1 Timothy 6:10? Talks about money. Money is the root of what? All evil. Now, is the money itself the evil? What would you say is? If not, then what is? What's that?
The person,
Person, the attitude towards it.
yeah.
If your number one goal is money, you know, and that's the issue. So, and then finally, we get into here, the next things we reference, verses 3 and 5 again right here, but on page 156, 157, judgment is a certainty. It says, James not only saw present judgment, their wealth decay, their character eroding, etc., but he saw future judgment before God. Jesus Christ will be the judge, and his judgment will be righteous. And reference right here, it says, James 5:3. Again, it says, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you. So, referring to rich men's wealth will be a witness against them. Talk about their rotten grain, etc. The wages they held back will be a witness against them. James 5:4 right there. The workers that testify against them. I was talking about the last part right there. So, it gets right there at the top of 157. God will not judge the sins because they've already been judged on the cross. But he will judge our works and our ministry. We have been faithful in serving and glorifying him. We will receive a reward. We have been unfaithful. We shall lose our reward but not our salvation. 1 Corinthians 3:1-15. So we're referencing there. And that kind of brought me to this question. When we started this, I don't know if you remember when we said like preachers and teachers in the church, everybody was wanting those positions, and James was warning, hey, you get a lot more responsibility with those. So so if you're going to pursue one of those spots, the accountability there is a little bit greater. You feel like if God has blessed someone with wealth, that could also possibly sort of be a situation as well. Opinions on that if you've been blessed with much, that you do have a higher obligation to do good with it. Is it similar like that? That was just the thought that came to my head. I'm not saying that's the case or not, but it's just one of those things there. What's that saying to, and I know we say it might be a verse, but to whom much is given, much is expected or something. What's that require? So, but yeah. And then finally, the loss of precious opportunities in verse 3. Proverbs 11:24-25. I'll read this one. There is that scattereth. There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also for himself. And it's kind of, that verses there, basically just saying, can we outgive God? Is it possible for us to outgive God? No, we can't. So, generosity is a godly character. And, the richest investment is to invest in others. And I'm trying to find right here where my thoughts on that was. Like I said, we can't outgive God. And, the most, if you think about it, some of the most satisfied people are those who are generous with their time and money, building other people up. So, I got this highlighted, we're not hard time reading it, but generosity is what God wants from us, and giving is a privilege, and attitude is everything. We can easily get entangled in our own stuff, and how can you be generous? What's the key thing about being generous? What's the first thing we got to do? You got to value other people. So that kind of gets us there to the conclusion. In Matthew 19-24, without looking it up, that's where Jesus says it's easier for a rich man to go through what is the eye of the needle, and then get into heaven. But there's 3 ways that we can look at the principles of James right here And it can be looked at either from a negative or positive point of view. It's like verses 1 through 3, don't hoard money greedily, don't withhold money deceitfully, and don't spend money selfishly. Basically, don't be greedy, don't be deceitful, and don't be selfish. I'm a positive guy, so I prefer to operate with that. Manage your money wisely, earn your money honestly, and share your money generously. You know, be wise, be honest, and be generous. And the last thing right there, this is one of my favorite things there, Mark 12, 41 through 44. And it says, and Jesus sat over against the treasury, and behold, how the people cast money into the treasury. Many that were rich cast in much. There came a certain widow. She threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples and said to them, verily I say unto you, this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in all of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. And what I wrote down in the notes right there is just the attitude between the givers right there. And so it's not a good way is it's not quantity or quality. And, you know, and if you can fool God on that, so he gonna know. But anyway, so I get that over because that's very uncomfortable. But it gives you an idea right there. Be honest, be wise, wisdom, be wise, be honest, and be generous. You know, that's pretty simple. 3 very short ways to remember how to do that. So, all right, we'll close with a word of prayer and get some time. Lord, again, we're thankful for this day. Thankful for your many blessings. Lord, just be watch over us, be with those who can't be here today, Lord. Lord, who can't because of the weather, Lord. Just like I said, just watch over them, keep them safe. Lord, those who are able to be here, Lord, again, just give us safe travel home, Lord. And Lord, be with us as we go through our worship service, Lord. Give us the words we need to hear, Lord. And Lord, just lead, God, and direct us that we can be better servants for you, Lord. Keep us in mind to be wise, to be honest and generous, Lord, and have the correct attitudes that we need to have with the things that you've been so kind to bless us with. Lord, forgive us where we fail. In Christ's name I pray.